So, very exciting to be here. And just to start off, whenever I speak to a group, I like to kind of understand where y'all are coming from. So how many of y'all are business school students here? Oh, okay. How many of y'all are undergrads? Oh, that's good. And how many of y'all are professors? And how many of y'all are none of the last three categories? Oh, really? Wow, the hands just keep going. Is anyone here not from the Berkeley community? Oh, okay. Some people got through. Very good. Very good. And actually, I'll ask another thing. How many of y'all have used the Khan Academy directly as part of your own studies in some way? Oh, very good. Very good. That's hope you got your money's worth. I thought it was. So for those of y'all who are not familiar, or actually some even people who are familiar, as you know, Khan Academy is most known for this collection of videos that I started making for my cousins. And what I'll start off with is showing a montage of those videos. But you'll see in that montage, you'll see some of the classic Khan Academy videos, but then you'll start to see some less classic videos and some videos that are made by other folks.
We could integrate over the surface, and the notation usually is a capital sigma. All of these interactions are just due to the gravity over interstellar, or almost you could call it intergalactic. This animal's fossils are only found in this area of South America, a nice clean band here. Notice this is an aldehyde, and it's an alcohol. Is there 30 million plus the $20 million from the American manufacturer. They create the Committee of Public Safety, which sounds like a very nice committee.
This is not Eve.
No, Botticelli's portrayed the ancient goddess of love.
This is 6 times 6 times 6, or 216.
I'm told the humidity makes it feel hotter. Why is this?
Excellent question, LeBron.
Let's just like make it 11.
Play with the pendulum and get a feel for how it moves.
Function as a bridge rectifier.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
If this does not blow your mind, then you have no emotion.
I always know a crowd that will appreciate Euler's identity. Y'all definitely met expectations. So as was introduced, it's we're kind of now at a kind of hard to comprehend scale for us, even though it's still I think at the very beginning of our journey. One thing that I'll emphasize is it's not me anymore. We're now 39 folks, a team based not too far from here. And as was introduced, 75 million students. They've done 1 billion exercises. It's being used in 20,000 classrooms in some way. 240 million videos have been watched. Well, what I want to do is take a step back, especially because there's a kind of a large kind of business school crowd here. I would guess kind of entrepreneurial crowd here. Just to give a little bit of the story of how all of this started, and then really talk about where this is going, and then really just have as much time as possible to get your questions and thoughts and feedback. If you rewind to 2004, as was introduced, I was a year out of business school. I had just gotten married. I was a year into kind of this job as a hedge fund analyst. And I had my cousins, they had come up for my wedding, and they were now visiting me in Boston. And one cousin in particular, Nadia, she was 12 years old, it just came out in the conversation that she was having trouble with math. In particular, it was unit conversion. And because of it, she was being tracked into a slower math track, and that got me scared because I don't think her parents recognized it. I don't think she realized it, but I knew what implications that could have later on. If she gets on the slower track now, then she might not be able to take more advanced courses later in high school. It would limit what career she has. And so I said, well, Nadia, how about when you get back to New Orleans, which is where I grew up as well, we work with each other. I tutor you. And she agreed. And so long story short, we got on the speakerphone every day, and we eventually, at the time, we used like Yahoo Doodle to write math equations and see what we were each doing. And about a month or two later, she started to really pick up things. And not only pick up things, but then start to actually get a little bit ahead of the curve. At which point I say that I became something what I call a tiger cousin. And I called up her school, and I said, I really think Nadia Rahman should retake that placement exam. And they said, who are you? And I'm her cousin. But that all worked out, and frankly, I like to show off about her. The same young girl who, entering 7th grade, was having trouble with units and was being placed into a slower math track. By her sophomore year in high school, was taking calculus at the local university. And it's a theme that we'll see over and, yeah, you can clap. That's it. No, I now tell Nadia there's a lot riding on her success, so I have to, a little bit of pressure. A little bit of, that was exciting. I was kind of hooked. I started working with her younger brothers, a couple of other family friends. And so you fast forward to 2006. At this point, the firm I was working for, and Brian actually worked at that firm. By this point, we had grown to a 5-person firm. And, but when I first joined, it was me, my boss, and his dog. And the dog was the chief economist. And he had business cards. And my boss's wife had become a professor at Stanford Law School, so we relocated the entire firm out to Palo Alto. And when I was there, actually, I started writing these little software tools. The first Khan Academy, this is what most people don't realize, had nothing to do with video. I was writing these little software quiz tools for my cousins, and I could keep track of what they were doing. And this was November 2006. I was showing this off to a friend at a dinner party. And by this point, word had gotten around in the family that free tutoring was going on. And I found myself every day after work working with about 10 or 15 cousins and family friends and whatever else. And I was showing this software tool to my friend, and he said, oh, Sal, this is really, really cool. But then I said, but it's still hard. I can't get the same, I can't scale, I can't have the same interactions that I had with Nadia now that I have 10 or 15 cousins that I'm working with. And he's the person, I give him credit, Zulfikar Ramzan, who said, well, why don't you, there's this YouTube thing, why don't you make some of your lessons and put them up on YouTube? It might help your cousins out a little bit. And I immediately thought it was a horrible idea. I said, no, YouTube is for cats playing piano. It's not for serious mathematics. But I got over the idea that it was not my idea, and sometimes hard for an MBA to do. And I decided to give it a shot. And I made those first few videos. I had my cousins. I said, look, if you need to review something, or if there's something that, when we had our tutorial, you didn't have enough time to go over it, why don't you take a look at these videos? And after about a couple of months, I asked them what they thought, and they gave the somewhat famous backhanded comment that they preferred me on YouTube than in person. And I took that as positive feedback. And it actually made a lot of sense when you thought about it, because they were able, now they didn't have to be embarrassed if they forgot something. They could pause and rewind to their cousin as they saw fit. They didn't have to feel the stress of someone saying, hey, are you getting it? Do you understand this? They can engage when they wanted to. But then, you fast forward a couple of months after that, and it started to become clear that people who were not my cousins were starting to watch. And, at first, it just get some comments every now and then where someone would say, oh, thank you, or that really helped, or hey, I really appreciate this video on algebra, or whatever it might be. And even that was kind of a neat thing. I don't know how much time you'll spend on YouTube, but most of the comments aren't quite positive. And so even a thank you was quite, but then the comments started to be like, hey, this is why I was able to pass algebra, or this is why I felt that I could be a physics major, I'm leaving the military and this is what gives me the confidence to go back to college. I remember those early days, we actually got several letters to this effect, but one in particular where it says, me and my entire family, we pray for your entire family every night for this resource. And you got to put yourself in my frame of mind at the point. I was working at a hedge fund. There wasn't a lot of prayer involved, other than, actually there was, actually Brian knows there was a little bit of this, little prayer. Didn't any way to get the alpha. So then, by 2009, it frankly just, it became hard for me to focus on my day job. And so, we had a little bit of savings, and so my wife and I, we kind of figured out, okay, look, let me focus on this for a year. Hopefully I set it up as a not-for-profit. Hopefully someone will recognize that there's almost an infinite social return on investment here, the scalability and whatever else. And so I quit my job, and I think like a lot of entrepreneurial stories, this is a not-for-profit entrepreneurial story, but it's very similar to any entrepreneurial story. You quit kind of optimistically naive or naively optimistic, where you're like, oh, I was already talking to some foundations, and they're like, oh, what you're doing is really great, blah, 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 blah. Oh, this is really exciting. And I was just expecting, oh, in the next few weeks, one of them is going to fund this. And it doesn't happen, to a large degree, because there wasn't really a model for this type of thing before. And so you fast forward about 9 months. It's now spring of 2010, not that long ago, about little under 3 years ago. And I frankly started to become pretty insecure about what was happening. Our son had been born. We were renting a larger house. We were eating into our savings to about about five or $6,000 a month. And I literally, there were some weak moments where I started to update my resume a little bit. And just as that was happening, I had a little link where people could send or give donations. And up to that point, I was getting 10, 50, every now and then a $100 donation would come in, and that was helping. But then all of a sudden, a $10,000 donation came in. So I look into this, and I see it's from someone named Ann Doer. She's based in Palo Alto. So I immediately emailed her back. I said, thank you very much. This was the largest donation that the Khan Academy has ever gotten. If we were a physical school, you would now have a building named after you, which I now learned is quite inexpensive, I think, for, I don't know what Berkeley goes for, maybe a bench. But Ann said, well, I really like what you're doing. I'd love to meet. So we literally met at an Indian buffet restaurant right in University Ave in downtown Palo Alto. And Ann said, well, what's your vision here? And I said, well, when you fill out literally the IRS paperwork to become a not-for-profit, they ask you a mission statement. And I was like, well, I don't know, a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere? And Ann says, well, that's ambitious. How do you see that happening? And I said, well, I like making these videos. There's all these people who are already sending letters about it. I want to continue doing that maybe the rest of my life. I want to find other people to do it in other subject domains. I want to translate it into the world's languages. But an education isn't just about video. It's also about interactivity. I want to figure out ways to students to get exercises, to get feedback, maybe eventually connect each other, maybe have labs, simulations. Keep pushing the envelope of what was possible virtual. And one thing that I'll keep emphasizing is I never thought that you could do it all necessarily virtual, but keep pushing the envelope of what you could do. And she says, well, yeah, it sounds like you're kind of doing it. How are you supporting yourself? And in as proud of a way as possible, I said, I'm not. And so Ann kind of nodded, and I got into my car, and she got on her bicycle, and we went home. And right when I was driving into my driveway, I got a text message from Ann, and it said, you need to be supporting yourself. I've just wired you $100,000. So it was a good day. I now take her text messages very seriously. And that was the first time that I recognized that, wow, I could definitely do this, that at least for the near term. And that was kind of the start of a whole cascade of, frankly, crazy and crazier events that have been happening the last 3 years. You fast forward 2 months, I was running a little summer camp in Portola Valley. I was kind of like this virtual teaching guy, but I was fascinated by the idea of, if you're doing all the lectures and problem sets virtually, what could you do with a physical environment? And so I had these middle school students, and I had 6 of them playing a game of Risk, and then I had the other 20 trading securities based on the outcome of the game of Risk, which was one 12-year-old invented naked shorting. I told him I could introduce him to some people who might give him an internship. But while that was happening, I got another series of text messages from Ann. And it was like 6 disjointed messages that just started to come through, and it said, at the Aspen Ideas Festival in Aspen, Colorado, in the main pavilion, Bill Gates is on stage right now, last 5 minutes talking about Khan Academy. So I didn't really know what to think of this. It was a little bit, I was like, is there a typo here, whatever? And so I immediately boot the nearest 7th grader off of a computer, and I start looking for confirmation of what Ann seems to be describing over text messages. And it didn't take long. People started to tweet about it. There were some even early blog posts about it. In a few hours, I was able to find a kind of an audio recording and then later a video recording of the actual event. Bill Gates literally talking about how he uses Khan Academy himself, uses it with his kids, which was both exciting and made me a little nervous. Those videos were for Nadia, not Bill Gates. And it left me actually in a very awkward situation that night. I literally went home. I told my wife about it and everything. But then I said, well, what do I do now? Do I call him? I suspect he's not listed. And they left me in that state for literally about 2 weeks. And then I was literally in my closet recording a video one morning, and I got a call on my cell phone from Seattle. And so I answered, hello? And hi, this is Larry Cohen. I'm Bill Gates' chief of staff. You might have heard that Bill's a fan. Yeah, I heard that. And he would, if you have time in the near future, we'd love to fly you up to Seattle and figure out how we can support you. And I was looking at my calendar, my little Google calendar for the month, completely blank. So I said, yeah, I've got to cut my nails on Wednesday, but other than that, I could meet Bill Gates. But that trip worked out well. They ended up supporting us, and right at around the same time, it's all of these crazy things started to happen. Google had come out of the woodwork, and so they also ended up supporting us as part of the 10 to the 100th project. And we were kind of up and running. We were able to not just support myself, but actually start to hire a team, especially a team kind of focused on building this entire platform. And what we started to work on was kind of an extension of what those little software tools that I had already kind of been I guess you could call it, say, prototyping for my cousins. And what we call our knowledge map is, I show this because it allows us to visualize how we think about a lot of these concepts. And right now, the interactivity on the site is focused on mathematics. You saw in the videos, the videos go much broader. And our goal really is to have everything be interactive. And in the Q&A, we could talk about what implications that might have for humanities or whatever else. And the general idea here is each of these circles are a concept in mathematics. And as a student shows proficiency in, say, addition and subtraction, or basic arithmetic, it'll move them to more and more advanced concepts. And it's kind of a common sense thing to do. It's the way a video game would work. You beat level 1, then you go to level 2. You beat level 2, you go to level 3. It's how you learn martial arts or a musical instrument. But the thing I like to emphasize is this is not the way a traditional school model works. In a traditional school model, you will group kids by age and move them together at a set pace, usually some type of a state-mandated pace. You'd have lecture homework, lecture homework, lecture homework, and then you'd give them an assessment. And on that assessment, let's say it's on basic exponents, you might get a C, you might get a B, you could even fail that assessment, someone might get an A minus, and regardless of where everyone was, you then move on to negative exponents or to logarithms, something that's more advanced. And the analogy there is, imagine if you were building a house and you were to employ the same methodology. You get the contractor in and you say, look, build the foundation. I've been told that I only have these 3 weeks in January to do it. So do what you can in 3 weeks. The contractor does the best they can. 3 weeks later, you get the inspector to show up. And you say, well, inspect this. And the inspector says, well, okay, the concrete's still a little wet right over there. That part's not quite up to code. I'd give it an 85. You say, great, that's a C. That's passing. Let's build the first floor. And so the same thing, you have exactly 2 weeks to do it. Contractor does the best they can. Maybe some of the workers didn't show up. Some of the supplies didn't come by. Inspector comes by a couple of weeks later, says, well, I'd give it a 90%. Great, that's a B minus. Let's build the second floor, the third floor. You keep doing that process. And then all of a sudden, when the whole thing collapses while the contractor is building the fourth floor, you say, oh my God, I had a horrible contractor. Or you say, oh, maybe I should have inspected the thing more. But the reality was the process was broken. You had these gaps that these students had, and you are identifying. You had a test that said they got a C in basic exponents, but then you ignored it, and you built, and then you tried to build on that very weak foundation onto something more advanced, and then you're surprised when a kid gets to an advanced level and they're not able to comprehend what's going on. And so what we're saying is, instead of holding fixed how long you have to learn something and when you learn it, and the variable component being how well you learn it, we should do it the other way around. The variable component should be when you get to learn something and how you get to learn it, essentially at your own pace, at your own time. And what's fixed is that you expect a high-level mastery of all of the students who are working on it. And just to give an idea of what these exercises look like, I like to show this one. I call this Montessori for calculus. And it's, it shows an idea of what you can do with this type of form factor. And some of our exercises are more traditional, add these two fractions. But we're starting to do a lot of kind of experiments and analytics to try to understand what are the best exercises to really allow someone to become proficient and retain different ideas. Now when all of this was starting, and literally 2.5 years ago, I assumed Khan Academy would be this thing that existed outside of the formal school system. I had read the same newspaper reports that everyone else had, school system, big bureaucracy, a lot of cynicism, whatever else. But right at that time, a local school district reached out, Los Altos, and said, we're fascinated by what y'all are doing. How would you reimagine a 5th grade math classroom? And so we thought this was just pie in the sky thinking. I said, well, we could now lecture can be on demand. We don't have to use scarce class time for lectures at the same pace. Kids can do that at their own time. Even the problem sets can happen at their own time, at their own pace. What I would do is a completely personalized, differentiated school for them, master concepts before moving on. Lecture is no longer the focus of the classroom, and the classroom and the teacher moves up the value chain by focusing much more on conversations with the students, a lot more peer-to-peer instruction, doing more project-based learning, and somewhat surprisingly, they agreed. And so we started our first kind of formal pilot in the school system. I guess the first of the now 20,000 classrooms that are using Khan Academy. And the one thing I like to emphasize, and we started seeing all sorts of incredible things, the amount of engagement that the teachers were seeing, with the amount of satisfaction they were getting, what the students were feeling. But the one narrative that I think for me was the most powerful is spoken by this graph, and it's kind of the similar story that I saw with Nadia that very first time. This horizontal axis is the days working on the site, and this is a report that the teachers get. Actually, anyone who uses Khan Academy and is a coach, and it's all free, can get this report, and there's a ton of other reports they can get. But this is just time, and the vertical axis right there is just a raw count of those number of circles that the student had completed. And each line here is a student in a class. And in this math class right over here, you see right at the beginning, there are some kids that are racing ahead really, really, really fast. And in a traditional class, you would say, oh, those are the honor students. Those are the gifted students. They have some students who are in the middle, and they have some students who start off a little bit slower. And in a traditional model, especially around middle school, I mean, this was what was happening to Nadia. You often say, hey, let's not force these kids ahead. Let's not slow these kids down. Let's separate them out. Let's put these kids into a fast track. Let's put these kids into a remedial class. But what we're seeing, and we're seeing this in public schools, private schools, charter schools, rich neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods, that if you just let every student to work at their own pace, to fill in those gaps that they've been accumulating their whole career as they were just pushed forward, even though they were getting a B minus, even an A minus, you had gaps. They were being pushed forward. If you let them fill in those gaps, the same student that you thought after day 10 was a little bit below average or even significantly below average can be the second best student in the class after 2 months. And we're seeing this over and over and over again, and we're only 2 years into this experiment. Who knows what type of changes we might see as you go 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years. The other thing that we remind ourselves, even though now 10% of our user base, 400,000 students are in those 20,000 classrooms, the bulk of Khan Academy users are still just people out there tapping into their potential. I suspect that most of y'all, when y'all used the site, were just using it supplementally as kind of in addition to what your formal school system. And I like to show this video. We actually watch this even in our organization to just remind ourselves of really who we're trying to reach and how much potential there is out in the world if we just let people tap into it.
My name is Mark Halberstadt. Growing up, I was really always a C student. I pretty much thought that the only thing I was good enough to do in college was major in music. But I sort of almost felt that it was more I was getting it because I was terrible at everything else. Really what I wanted to do was electrical engineering. And the last thing that I remember completely not getting was trig identities. So I went to YouTube and I did a search for trig identities, and the Khan Academy was the first thing that popped up. Watched a bunch of videos in the trig playlist to kind of get caught up to speed. I watched all the videos in the calculus playlist. I watched all the videos in the physics playlist. Watched a lot of videos on arithmetic. I took a leap and I decided to go back to school and went to Temple University, majored in electrical engineering, getting a second bachelor's. And keep in mind, I was really a straight C student growing up. And I just finished this year, first year back in college, I got a 4.0 GPA for the entire year. I got perfect scores on both of my calc final exams and also on my chemistry final exam. I ended calculus, chemistry, both calculus classes, Calc 1 and 2, and chemistry with an average higher than 100%. There are some Khan Academy videos that I probably listened to the same concept over 20 or 30 times. And there is no tutor in the world I could have paid to have sat next to me and repeated the same thing over 20 or 30 times without at least them getting a little bit judgmental, or at least them thinking like, oh, well, this guy really is never going to get this concept and he should just give up. Where the understanding really happened was watching those videos and also working through the Khan Academy software and everything. The impact for me in my life, I really see it growing exponentially over the next 20 or 30 years. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you.
And Mark is now a junior and he still has a 4.0, so he's doing He's doing all right. So the last aspect, and this is, even in the introduction we talked about, a lot of what I've talked about is just our world, the developed world, but it's probably dawned on a lot of you, and even in the early days with me, I was like, wait, what are the implications here for the developing world? And we're still at the very early stages of this, and a lot of it is done by other groups who just started taking our stuff, helping to translate it, helping to bring it out into the field. But these are all pictures of other not-for-profits taking Khan Academy's resources, either offline or online, and bringing it to all sorts of places. And all of these stories are pretty exciting. Although the kind of the craziest one is the one up there in the top right. I used to give talks like this about a year and a half ago, and I used to say, and one day this might be used in Mongolia, just kind of thinking of the furthest place I could imagine. And then about a year ago, we get an email from Mongolia. And it was from Zaya, the girl in that top right, and she wrote about how she liked Khan Academy, and she even sent a YouTube video, not too different than Mark's video. And I was like, oh, this is really great, this is really exciting. I assumed that she must be middle class or an upper middle class, that she had access to YouTube, she had access to computers and all the rest. But then when I read the email more carefully, it turned out that there was a group from Silicon Valley working at Cisco Systems, I think they've now branched off as a separate entity, who in their vacation time went and set up, with internet, computer labs in orphanages throughout Asia. And Zaya, when she started, was actually a 15-year-old orphan girl. Those were pictures of the girls in Mongolia, orphan girls, using Khan Academy. And that by itself is kind of exciting and science fiction-y enough. But it got even crazier because now Zaya, who's now 17, is our #1 creator of content in the Mongolian language. So I told her I'd write her a good college recommendation. So I thought maybe she'll come. So the next montage I want to show you, just to give you a sense of where this translation project is going. As was introduced, we have 4,000 videos in English. We have over now 7,000 videos in other languages. I shouldn't even say that they're being translated. To a large degree, they're being redone in other languages by other teachers. But this will give you a sense of what that project is like. And then it finishes with a little note, part of the note, the original note that Zaya had sent us.
Sí decimos que bueno, esta fue la primera cara y esta fue la segunda cara.
तो ये जो है जो ऑब्जर्वर यहाँ कहीं बैठा होगा तो उसको ये इमेज जो है
那个角就是正弦数值对应的角。Мы можем обе стороны разделить на b plus a.
Également sur la dernière leçon, שהנקודה בשאלה. אז למעשה זה רק השינוי בערך y.
و انگلیزه رو ما اگه بدیم به نونوایی چیزی
এখন দুই কার্বন যুক্ত অ্যাসিটাইল কোয়ে উৎপন্ন হয়
auf der Zahlengerade zeichnen. Hier ist meine Zahlengerade.
Mas é claro que ele fez muitas e muitas e muitas outras coisas importantes.
I'm Zaya from Mongolia. Your videos are so interesting and funny. Make more lessons.
I watch that when I get lazy. So the one thing I like to emphasize is, once again, it's not just me anymore. We're approaching 40 folks. And I like to also emphasize the kind of scale that can be reached here. Over the last year, we averaged 24 employees. Obviously, we're growing rapidly from 1 to 40 in the last 2.5 years. We averaged 24 folks, and we were able to reach 43 million people. And just so give people proper perspective, if this is about a centimeter high, if this was actually drawn to scale, it would be 20 kilometers high. And that will lead me into my recruiting pitch, is that we are hiring. And so in all things, but especially on the engineering and and actually at some of the research side and even on the school interfacing side. And so I come here with selfish motivation, so I'm hoping that some of y'all can help us to continue to get this type of scale. So the original tagline was just the necessities. So, just to kind of close before, I'd love to take as many questions as we can here. When I first put that mission statement with the IRS on a free world-class education for anyone, anywhere, I mean, it was, even now it's a somewhat delusional thing to say, but even then it was an incredibly delusional thing to say. But the amazing thing, at least for me personally, about this adventure is it's getting less and less delusional every day. And to a large degree, I mean, the more I think about it, and a lot of what I write in the book is about this, it's a lot about the history of education, which is actually a surprisingly fascinating history. It feels like we are at one of those moments in history. I tell our team every day, this isn't even a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. This is like a once-in-a-millennium opportunity. It feels like we're at a Gutenberg moment where the dissemination of information can be free, where in the past, when you talked about philanthropy, you would say, well, what do the rich have? Well, that's nice, but that's expensive, and these poor people have nothing. Well, maybe we can give them a cheap approximation. And even that was great, because they had nothing before. But what's exciting is that we're starting to enter a reality where the Zayas of the world, an orphan girl in Mongolia, doesn't get a cheap approximation of what Bill Gates' kids have. They have the exact same resources as what Bill Gates' kids have. And so I imagine, and it's kind of a crazy thing to say, but there's no reason why it can't happen, why over the next 10, 20, 30 years, something as scarce but as important as education stops being viewed as a luxury or something that only a few people have into really a human right, and it's like clean drinking water or electricity, something that just people expect for pretty much anyone. And with that, I'd love to take any questions. People come up to the...
Yes, there you go.
Yeah, y'all can line up at the microphones. There's microphones.
Thanks. And so we are putting a video together here today, so we need you to ask your questions at the microphone. So if you could line up behind the microphone and kick it off, that would be great. And we will also take questions from our evening weekend MBA students. Please, ma'am, first question. Thanks.
Hi. First of all, I want to say thank you very much for what you're doing. This is really amazing. My daughter is going to grad school to get a master's in special ed and a teaching credential. So I wanted to ask you how you see this being applicable to those types of students.
For special ed students. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really interesting question. We haven't formally designed or formally studied how Khan Academy could be used by special ed students. We've gotten a lot of anecdotal letters. In fact, that first letter about the family that was praying, two of their children had a reading, one had ADHD and one had dyslexia. And once again, it's anecdotal, not a formal study, but for them, they felt like just the conversational tone, the writing, the ability to kind of work at their own pace made a difference for those students. I think it would be fascinating for us to study that better. But yeah, I guess the simple answer is we don't know. I mean, I think there is something to do here. I'll broaden the question a little bit. What's another exciting part of this, we were just, right before this talk, I was speaking with some of the folks from the ed school and other departments here at Berkeley. And one thing that I hope Khan Academy can be, above and beyond what I just talked about, above and beyond being able to reach students like Zaya or Mark Halberstadt and let them tap into their potential, I hope it can be a really powerful research platform where we have 3 million exercises being done every day. We have millions of kids using the site every month, and that number's only growing. The same experiments that used to take weeks and was hard to control for, we can now, the same technology that Amazon.com uses to optimize whether you're going to click buy for a book, we can start to optimize whether you're going to be engaged on the site or whether you're going to learn. And we might be able to, and we should also be able to do this with special groups of students, whether they have dyslexia, ADHD, or other types of kind of learning disabilities. So not a lot yet, but I think there's a lot that we might be able to do. There in the back.
Hi, I'm Lisa Feldman from MBA Career Management at Berkeley Haas. Thank you for being here and for telling your inspiring story, especially with such humility. Some of my students know I talk about the serendipity in our career paths, and I think you had a couple moments and I wanted to ask about them. How did Ann Doerr and Bill Gates find out about you? I think there must have been some agency on your part that resulted in those two people popping up in your story.
Yes, and especially about Bill Gates, about 40 people have taken credit for introducing him to, I haven't gotten, I've thanked them all. For Ann, it was, her daughter was, I believe she was in middle school in Palo Alto at the time, and one of the other mothers had told Ann that my children are really getting a lot out of this Khan Academy thing, you should check it out. And then Ann checked it out, and she, herself, because it's not just kind of academic math, there's stuff there about the financial crisis, about accounting, about kind of current events. And so she found herself spending like a full day on it, and so that's kind of what inspired her to give the very generous donation that she did. Bill Gates, I mean, regardless of who introduced it, I heard someone at the foundation sent him an email, check this out. They knew that he's famous for reading a lot and liking online lectures and all of this. And they sent it to him, and the account that I heard is that he normally sends things back like, oh, I've already seen it, not a big deal, or whatever. Like, he's a really fast information processor. But they didn't hear back from him. They sent them the link. They didn't hear back from him for like a day. And then he emails back. He says, I just spent the last day on Khan Academy. Which is, once again, a little bit, I still find that a bit of a stressful idea. But yeah, and that's what kind of catalyzed this whole thing. In terms of what I did to make that happen, I can't say that I mean, what I did is I just kept going. I mean, throughout this thing, most people thought this was a fairly crazy project. And especially because there's nothing really novel about the idea. The idea of recording lectures and even exercises, putting it online. I mean, people were talking about this since radio. Oh, radio is going to be the killer app for education, or TV. Now with VCRs, it's on demand. Even exercises. Steve Jobs famously thought the PC was going to be the treadmill for the mind. So these weren't new ideas. But I think it was just, I was satisfied with kind of the small wins. Hey, my cousins find this valuable. And hey, people are emailing me. I'm getting a lot of satisfaction out of this. And I kind of said, oh, one day when I have kids now, but one day when I have kids, they could use these videos. How cool is that? And I think that's what kind of gave me the energy to just kind of keep going. And I think you'll hear in a lot of entrepreneurial stories, it's kind of just, as long as what you're doing is kind of unkillable, and what I was doing was unkillable, it was a hobby for so long, that at some point it finds its moment, and if it's destined to have a moment, and then people discover it, and it just kind of hits a hockey stick like that.
Thank you.
Oh, digital pipe.
Yes. Raj Gunluru asks, what is your advice for entrepreneurs who want to launch non-profit organizations?
My advice for entrepreneurs who want to launch not-for-profit organizations. So, I'll start with another question. So there's actually a case study, a business school case study on Khan Academy on whether Khan Academy should have been a not-for-profit or a for-profit entity. And I think that informs this question, because I think everyone, if you're starting an organization, and about a year ago, we had a lot of debates in the organization. A lot of our advisors were saying, hey, this is cute that y'all started as a not-for-profit, but not-for-profit's not going to be able to have access to capital the way a for-profit does. A not-for-profit's not going to be able to attract talent the way a for-profit does. A not-for-profit's going to be a lot less efficient. And these were just kind of the biases that Silicon Valley, and in fact the business world, has. And there's actually a lot of data points to back up those biases. But what we found deciding to stay being a not-for-profit is all of those things were actually not only not true for not-for-profit, but they were the exact opposite. That we're able to get the absolute best talent. There was a study that came out several years ago that the best way to motivate people, yes, you have to pay them well so that they don't have to worry about whether their kids are going to go to college or they can pay their mortgage. And we do pay people well, which is kind of unusual for a not-for-profit. Very well, upper quartile Silicon Valley. I'm getting into recruiting mode. And our board, and this is where we're very fortunate, I would say this is probably advice for Raj, I think his name was, is you should have a board that really respects what you're doing and thinks what you're doing is as important as anything that can be done. Because if they believe that, then they're like, why should someone have to take a pay cut for doing good as opposed to going and working in something else? So we're able to attract the best talent because they're getting paid well, and to that study I was citing, they have intellectually challenging work, and they have a mission, which is kind of what that study came up with as the key ingredients for motivating really, really good people. Access to capital, I mean, education, pretty much whether you're in healthcare, education, any of these big sectors, there's so much philanthropic capital that is looking for high social return on investment opportunities that I don't think the access to capital is an issue. And on top of that, how it's structured, the only difference between a not-for-profit and a for-profit, or the differences are, what is your bottom line? And I take a strong stand. I don't think there is such a thing as a double bottom line organization. You kind of have to pick that's why it's called the bottom line. It's the one on the bottom. And in a not-for-profit, it's your social mission. And so that's something that I think the entrepreneur has to think about. What is my bottom line? In a for-profit, you can do good. In fact, a lot of the good in the world is happening from for-profit entities. They're giving us cool devices and software and whatever else. But their bottom line, I worked in the hedge fund industry for a long time. They have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to optimize shareholder value. And so you have to think about what that's going to be. And also, a not-for-profit is forced to reinvest any profits it might have. We can generate revenue if we wanted to back into the mission, while a for-profit has to It could reinvest it, or it could dividend it out, or do a share buyback, or whatever. And so in my thinking for going not-for-profit, it was much more around how do we create an institution that is focused on its mission, that can last beyond me, that's not going to be dependent on acquisitions or whatever else. In terms of how he should think about that, I mean, my experience is have the exact same lens and discipline that any entrepreneur, for-profit or not, would have, which is, you know, what is the value that I'm able to give to people? Am I able to scale? Am I able to be capital efficient? Am I able to get the best talent? And do I have some way to sustain the operations?
Yes, so we've seen recently a lot of revolution in the online learning with the websites like Coursera and Udacity. But those are more geared towards the higher education.
Yeah.
So I would like to know your vision about higher education, and is Khan Academy focused on the, you know, like school age children, kids, or like you're going towards also higher education?
Yeah, no, really good question. So the way that I guess for lack of the market is kind of decomposed right now, you have these MOOCs, these Coursera and edX and Udacity that have emerged, these massively open online courses, and you have Khan Academy, and people kind of say, oh, Khan Academy, maybe that's K through 12, and the MOOCs are higher education or beyond. And that is true to some degree. I think our core is probably middle school through the core classes in college, while they are doing stuff like machine learning, but they also are starting to go in the core classes in college and maybe the upper level courses in high school. I think the key differences between us and the MOOCs, and there's not any obvious benefit one way or the other, the MOOCs are taking traditional courses. You start on a certain date, you move together as a cohort, and so you get that cohort effect, but in some ways it's just virtualizing the traditional academic model. While we're trying to some degree, rethink what that model can be. Can it be more asynchronous? Can it be more based on competency? Are there multiple paths? Can we personalize the path more as opposed to just saying this is what you're going to kind of go through? The thing about what's going to happen with higher education generally, I think is an interesting question, because whether you're talking about Khan Academy or the MOOCs, I think you could like Pavlovianly train me to like walk in certain patterns. There's Feynman famously was able to teach his dog to run in circles anyway. But I think what's very, very clear is access to high quality lectures, access to interactive content, probably better interactive content that you would get in a traditional classroom or traditional textbook. These are all going to be free and common and available. I mean, most of these kind of core classes are available. Next 5 or 10 years, anyone on the planet is going to be able to access, if they have the access to technology, which is happening as well, the best courses. And so the question is, what becomes of the physical? And the one thing I stress, I mean, I have young kids, I want them to go to a physical school. Virtual can never kind of fully replace the type of experience you can have in a social environment. But what I stress is, education is a spectrum, where over here is like your multiplication tables and your history facts. And as you go further and further and further in this direction, you're getting to more open-ended kind of creative tasks. And a lot of the traditional school system, both K through 12 and higher education, is kind of focused, not just rote stuff. I mean, they're doing higher order skills, but it's a lot, hey, lecture, here's an exam, here's some of your core skills. I think a lot of that online can do, or frankly is already doing, and even some of the stuff here online can do by allowing people to collaborate and do peer review. But the role it's not to replace physical institutions, it's to allow the physical institutions to move up the value chain. And so what I stress is what these things are just tools so that the physical environment is not lecture-based anymore, is not kind of, you can get human beings in a room, but they're all just passively sitting and taking notes. You're not really leveraging the fact that you have human beings in the room. And so hopefully a lot of these things that are happening, Khan Academy, the MOOCs, will be the catalyst for universities and for K through 12 to say, yeah, we shouldn't give lectures anymore. It should be all interaction. And I want to stress, this isn't a new idea. Business schools have been doing this for 100 years with the case study, where you come and it's all about conversation. The humanities have been doing this with kind of seminars. It's just those core classes, your calculus, your physics, that you kind of sit in a room and 300 people are in it, that I think are going to change dramatically. I think the other big change that's going to happen I thought we told people to turn their birds off. The other thing that I think is happening is credentials have historically been kind of seat time based. Did you spend 4 years there? I mean, I find it funny that every major of study is exactly 4 years long. Clearly the thinking was, let's make people come here for 4 years, and then let's think about what they'll do in those 4 years. And so I think we're going to move much more to a competency-based model, So regardless of how you learned it, where you learned it, who taught it to you, you can prove that you learned it at a very high standard. One, that'll benefit people who learned in non-traditional ways. It'll kind of allow people the choice of how they learn best. And I think it'll also kind of level the playing field. You know, right now, yes, if you're a computer science major from Berkeley and you have a high GPA, you'll get interviews with all the best companies. But if you are a computer science major from, you know, I could pick a random a university, you know, that's not as well known, even if you learn the material really, really, really well, you're not going to get the interviews, just because that credential that you invested a lot of time and money in doesn't give quite the same signaling value. So if we could have more universal credentials that are decoupled from the learning experience, it'll also give an opportunity for those students to compete. So I don't know how all of this is going to play out, but those two things I think seem like they're happening.
Thanks, Sal. So we have one more digital question, and then 3 in the front and 1 in the back. Why don't we do digital, 1 in the front, 1 in the back, and then the final 2 here, and then we'll have to end the session. I'm very, very sorry.
So we have a question from Nago, who's one of our evening and weekend students. How do you see textbooks evolving over the next 5+ years?
The frank answer is, I think and they know it. I mean, I'm not, you know, and it's not because of Khan Academy, otherwise I'd be wearing a bulletproof vest. I think the textbook industry is getting collapsed very, very, very rapidly. And I think in 10 years, essentially the industry will not exist. And you know, the reason's kind of obvious. What are the 2 things that a textbook tries to do? It tries to explain some concepts, and it tends to do this in this kind of prose text that it does. But even there, it has no idea of who's reading what. It has no information that version 5 is actually better than version 4. Which is better than version 3. There's no data to prove that. In fact, I think that whole thing could be catalyzed. I actually, when I've spoken even at other campuses or other groups, I always said, you know, I'm just waiting for like some group of Berkeley freshmen, because this is where, you know, all these kind of things start, to just, when the calculus professor says, okay, this year we're going to be using version 7 of my textbook, and then all the 300 kids say, no, professor, we're using version 6. And just that act alone would send shockwaves throughout the entire industry. But it would be a completely rational thing to do. And so on that prose part, I would argue that the on-demand video or even text is going to be better because you get all the data, you can improve it, you can understand what's better, you can run all these experiments, you can see who's using what. And then textbooks, the only thing that separates a textbook from a nonfiction book is that it gives you exercises, practice problems. And even there, it's, you know, it gives you maybe 50 problems at the end of the unit. Half of the answers are in the back of the book. There aren't a lot of explanations, not a lot of feedback. Obviously, the interactive stuff, you can get a lot more feedback. You can give much more data, much more analytics. You can do real-time reporting. You can benchmark against other students. You can have community. There's no community with a textbook. And so when things that already exist are out there and free are far better than this thing that costs $100, I see no rational reason why it should be around in 10 years.
Not everybody can be a teacher. I've tried some of the translations of your videos, and they have been insipid at best. You know, expressing your passion for Euler's equation is not everybody's cup of tea.
No, surprising.
So the biggest bang for the buck would come, I would imagine, from the non-English.
From teaching me French, or no?
So what is the feedback that you're getting on these translated videos, and what do you do to ensure you know, their quality, that, you know, they have the same infectious enthusiasm that you portray in the original videos?
Yeah, and I mean, and I think that, I mean, frankly, that applies to my videos or anyone else we get in English as well. Is, you know, how do we make sure that we have reasonable quality, that they are engaging, et cetera, et cetera. The way we view the translation project is, well, I'll say, you know, if you go to YouTube, even before I got into this in like 2005, if you went to YouTube, in most concepts in mathematics, especially core classes, you'll actually already find 5 or 6 videos. And, you know, they're of varying quality and whatever else. But if you went into any other language, you'd find close to 0 videos. I mean, you might find a few in Spanish or some of the larger languages, but you go into Mongolian, there's exactly 0 videos on balancing chemical equations. And so our thinking with the translation project is, first wave, let's just get something out there, because it's better than nothing, especially because a lot of these kids don't even have teachers to access. They have absolutely nothing. So that was the first wave. But now we are in a stage where we're partnering with groups, and some were introduced, the Carlos Slim Foundation in Mexico, the Lemon Foundation in Brazil, very substantive, very real, very serious organizations in their respective countries that are taking this process very seriously. And so they are, in fact, I would say they're further ahead than we are. I mean, we're starting to experiment, well, how do we get someone to teach quantum physics? And actually, we are looking for someone to teach quantum physics and string theory, so if any of y'all are interested. But how do we find people, and how do we vet people, and how do we train people for this very non-traditional job? I mean, the analogy is, it's like starting a movie studio in 1915, where, you know, people are on Broadway, the Broadway actors aren't even sure that this movie thing is a good idea, and we don't even know what are the differences between acting on Broadway and acting in a movie. But these guys are kind of, they've already started to develop a process around, okay, let's vet people, let's get other people, other experts in that language to vet the videos. So hopefully, you know, and let us know which of the videos are, you know, not up to par, and actually we're also looking for volunteers to help with some of that. Tell us where are we hitting the spot and where aren't we? That'd be a really valuable thing.
Hi, my name is Francisco Fuentes, and I work for Samasource, a impact sourcing.
Oh yeah, with Leila Jinnah.
Yeah, social mission nonprofit tech company in SF, and I'm the curriculum developer and instructor for their SAMA USA, their US program, and I wanted to know what rules or guidelines do you follow to make creative, simple, and effective online videos?
Yeah, you know, and I mean, this has proven to be harder to kind of distill into like a, you know, like instructions than we thought. You know, the one thing I say, I mean, I think it was a huge blessing that I started making these videos for my cousins and not for Bill Gates, because if I had started with that lens and if I had a lot of resources, I probably would have fallen into the trap that I think most publishers fall into, where they say, okay, we need to make this look polished. And what they do is they'll hire a bunch of people to write a script, and they'll hand that script to like James Earl Jones, and you know, in fact, it's never James Earl Jones. That would actually be quite nice. But it would be, you know, it's someone who will just literally read the script. Then they'll maybe, if they have a budget, they'll throw some computer graphics on it. But the thing I stress, with that final product, it looks polished if you were to just sample it. It looks a lot more polished than anything I showed tonight. But it's hard for students to connect with that. It literally feels like your GPS device. It's like, the next step in photosynthesis is when the mitochondria, and it's like, oh, that's not another human being. And then when you do get human beings kind of speaking from themselves, unfortunately, they kind of fall into two categories a lot. Sometimes it'll be like, oh yeah, you know, it's really easy, you know, the next 5 steps are obvious, blah, 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 there you go. And that obviously has the impact of, oh, I don't get this, okay, I'm not feeling that good. And then oftentimes when you give the feedback, and I've literally gone through this process with some folks, look, you know, not everyone can understand those steps, why don't you speak it more transparently? Then they go into this other kind of Mr. Rogers mode, which is like, okay, children, the next, which is actually the worst mode of all, because no one wants to be talked to like they're kindergartner, even kindergartners. And so the one thing I try to emphasize, and it's a small thing, but it's a subtle thing, of literally respect the person that is listening to you. And the easiest way to respect them, or to sound like you respect them, is to actually respect them. To actually feel like this is another person who's just like me, who's smart, but just doesn't understand this concept, and for you to also have the security to just kind of make your thought process as transparent as possible. I think if people can do that and then focus less, and obviously I think PowerPoint's a nightmare, I think scripts are nightmares, I think get the concept very well distilled in yourself, and then keep this kind of respectful lens, and then I think people will feel that and they'll connect with whoever's producing the video.
Thank you.
So if we are at a Gutenberg-type precipice, do you see Khan Academy as part of a greater ecosystem of learning? And if so, what do you think are the top opportunities for products or services or architectures that will complement the asynchronous style of Khan Academy?
Yeah, I mean, I do think we're at a Gutenberg moment, and I do think the world of education will look very different in 30 years than it does today. I'm not an expert on, well, I can only give a guess on what are going to be the main pieces of the ecosystem. You're definitely going to have a ton of resources that are, you know, already do what kind of Khan Academy and the MOOCs are doing. I think there's going to be kind of an effect where whoever has critical mass, or the small subset that have critical mass, because they're going to be able to perfect their usage with data, because they're going to be able to use their users to help each other, they're going to have an advantage here. I think the credentialing architecture is going to be a really interesting thing. I don't know who's going to do that, whether it's going to be coming from some of the entities, the Khan Academy or the MOOCs or whoever else, whether it comes from the Berkeleys of the world, whether it comes from governments, whatever else. I do think those things are going to emerge. I could imagine kind of industries emerging around on these platforms, people kind of building careers as tutors, maybe free initially, but then as they get a reputation, they could maybe make a living doing this type of thing, being a coach or a tutor. I think the big thing is that you're just going to have a lot more kind of diversity in what an educational institution looks like. I would guess on both the for-profit and the not-for-profit side. That's, I mean, I have nothing more concrete than that. Yeah. This has got to be an awesome question.
All right, make it as awesome as possible.
Yes.
So I think we've seen a lot of success with things like math, physics, computer science, which are easy to demonstrate in a computer setting. How do you see that success being replicated for less easily testable and less easily interactizable,
Yes.
for lack of a better word, subjects?
That was an awesome question. That was it. So there tends to be this view of like, oh, math is kind of, there's always a right answer. Humanity is much more subjective. I actually think they're more common than most people give either credit for. The one thing I point out is, and many of y'all who are graduate students in the math or science would recognize, look, being able to do your algebra or take a derivative or whatever, this is like a painter being able to mix paint. These are the technical skills, but the real creativity is not in being able to do these things in the textbooks. It's to be able to apply them to come up with novel theorems or build something that has never been built before, or write a novel piece of software. And the same thing is true in the humanities. There's a core set of skills, whether it's vocabulary or grammar or kind of a core scaffold of history or whatever it might be, and then you start moving up and up into more subjective and creative things. And our view is, so across the board, and when you're talking about history, there are things that there's reasonable agreement that, okay, there are some facts here. It's for anyone to be in this space, they should be reasonably familiar with that. The same is true in writing. There's obviously people, grammar, vocabulary. I think as you move further up, even the subjective stuff, it's funny, I did a video on the CIA intervention in Chile based on, the CIA's published documents, based on primary documents, and obviously a very subjective thing. I tried to be as unbiased as possible, but I always say in my videos, look, everyone's got bias. And I immediately on the message board, it started to light up. Some Americans were saying you're being unfair to the CIA. This was during the Cold War. You have to put yourself better in that mindset. And then I got letters from around the world, even Chile, saying you're an imperialist pig. You have whitewashed history. My uncle died in that intervention. And at first I got scared. I was like, this didn't happen on my algebra videos. It also did not happen in any of the history courses I took, whether it was in high school or college. And then I asked myself, well, why didn't this happen in the history classes that in a traditional history class, the professor will say something, the students will take notes, and then they'll write an essay that, they'll try to approximate what the professor might want to hear. There is no Chilean student saying, you're wrong, professor, you're an imperialist pig. Look, I have evidence that this happened to my uncle, I have a firsthand account. And I think that's, just on the content delivery side, some of the beauty of the internet is that there is no safety behind a closed door anymore. It's literally a wide open field. People can comment. You are at the scrutiny not just of a few editors at your textbook or a few of the people in your department. You're at the scrutiny of the whole world. And so if you're not intellectually honest about these things, they'll get you. In terms of the more very subjective kind of interactive tasks, we've actually already started to experiment with this with our computer science platform, where it isn't videos and, what's 5 + 4. It's a place where students can write software. It's kind of a neat little platform where they can draw things and whatever else. They save it in their profile as their kind of portfolio of creative works. Other students can go and comment it and rate it up or down. And we think, frankly, that exact same process could be used in writing. It could be used in the humanities, where you write a paper about something, and instead of it just being graded by someone and chucked into the bin, it gets part of your portfolio. Other people will give you feedback on it. The more feedback you give other people, which is a really good cognitive task, it's a really good learning task, just to critically analyze other people's work, the more feedback you will get. And so I think there's elements here, and we're just at the very early stages here, where I think we could start to do things that even a physical class might not have been able to do. But it's very early days, and we really don't know. So with that, I'll thank you.
Salman.
Thanks again.
another few hundred ripple effects. Sal, thank you very, very much, and thanks to all of you for coming.